I'm Jordan, and my friend Leela dared me to spend the night alone in an abandoned bowling alley. At first, it felt like a stupid prank, but the moment the first ball rolled by itself, I realized we weren't alone. Something was waiting for us, watching every move, and the pins. The pins weren't what they seemed. I never thought a night at the bowling alley could feel so wrong. When I arrived, the neon sign above the entrance buzzed faintly, flickering as if struggling to stay alive, and the wet asphalt beneath my shoes reflected its broken glow in jagged streaks. The parking lot was nearly empty. A few cars sat in silence, their windows dark, and the air smelled sharp with ozone and something faintly metallic. Normally, Friday nights at a place like this would be full of laughter and clattering balls, the smell of popcorn and nachos filling every corner. But tonight, it was quiet, too quiet, and the silence pressed against me like a living thing. I stepped inside, and the smell hit me immediately: stale popcorn mixed with the chemical temps of waxed floors. Something warm and slightly rotting that I couldn't place. The fluorescent lights overhead flickered intermittently, casting uneven shadows that danced across the lanes, stretching figures that weren't there. A few people were scattered across the alley, but they didn't move like people normally did. Their heads tilted unnaturally, their movements jerky, almost robotic. I couldn't focus on them for long. Something in the back of my mind whispered that I shouldn't be here, that whatever those figures were, they weren't human in the way I understood. I wandered toward the ball rack, my fingers brushing over the smooth surfaces of the spheres. One ball in particular seemed heavier than the rest, its surface slick in a way that almost felt wet, like it had absorbed something I couldn't name. I picked it up, trying to ignore the shiver running down my spine. The lane ahead seemed longer than normal, stretching farther than it should, the pins at the end barely visible. I chalked it up to my nerves and tried to focus on my throw. I rolled the ball, watching it glide down the lane with perfect precision. It struck the pins, but one remained standing, wobbling unnaturally, leaning forward as if straining to watch me. I frowned, uneasy, but told myself it was just a trick of the light. Still, the lane seemed darker than it should have been, the edges of my vision stretching into shadows that weren't supposed to exist. My reflection in the polished surface of the floor caught my attention, and for a split second I thought I saw a figure standing behind me. Pale, impossibly tall, it didn't move, but I could feel its gaze pressing down on me. I spun around, heart hammering, but the space behind me was empty. I tried to shake off the feeling, telling myself it was imagination. But when I looked back at the pins, my stomach dropped. A shadow stretched from the farthest pin toward me, a dark smear on the lane that had no explanation. It moved slowly, inching closer, twisting and stretching like a hand reaching for something it wanted to claim. My body froze, my heart pounded in my ears, drowning out everything else. The fluorescent lights flickered faster, and the quiet hum of the alley seemed to warp into a low, pulsing vibration that rattled my teeth. I wanted to leave. I had to leave. I tried to step backward, but my legs refused to obey. It was as if the floor itself had grown sticky, holding me in place. Panic clawed at me as the shadow continued to move, its shape elongating unnaturally. I tried to scream, but no sound emerged from my throat. My lungs burned as I struggled to breathe, every instinct screaming at me to run, yet my body remained paralyzed. The pins at the end of the lane seemed to shiver, as if alive. One of them, standing stubbornly upright, leaned toward me, tilting slightly to the side as if listening, observing, waiting. The air grew colder, and the faint smell of decay seeped into my nostrils. My hands trembled as I reached for another ball, hoping that rolling it might somehow break this feeling. But the racks were now empty, and the remaining balls on the floor rolled, slightly moving on their own as if nudged by invisible fingers. Then I heard a whisper. It was faint, almost beneath the threshold of hearing, like the hissing of someone exhaling through clenched teeth. One could not place its source. It seemed to come from the pins, the shadows, the floor beneath me all at once. My eyes darted around, seeking any sign of the origin, but the alley appeared frozen in silence, still and empty. My skin prickled as if hundreds of tiny hands had brushed against it, and I realized the whispering was forming words. Not words I could understand, not in any language I knew. It was a sound meant to warn, to lure, to terrify. And then, in the reflection of the polished floor, I saw it again. The figure, closer this time. Its form was vague, but its eyes, or the places where eyes should be, were black hollows staring into mine. It didn't move, yet the feeling of being observed intensified, pressing into my chest like a weight. I blinked, and it seemed to lean forward slightly. The shadow from the pins stretched further, reaching toward me. I realized, in the horrifying moment before I could even react, that I was not alone. Something had been waiting here, and it was awake. I forced myself to step back, my sneakers sliding slightly on the cold, sticky floor. The shadow from the pins had stopped moving, but the chill in the air made my skin crawl. I tried to calm myself, telling myself it was just my imagination, that the darkness and flickering lights were playing tricks. But deep down, I knew something was wrong, terribly wrong. Every instinct in me screamed that I wasn't supposed to be here, and yet I couldn't bring myself to leave. My legs felt heavy, my body tense, as if some invisible weight pressed down on me, rooting me in place. I glanced toward the snack counter, hoping to see anyone, but it was empty. The fluorescent light above it flickered unevenly, revealing shattered glass from the display cases, like someone or something had been there before me. The vending machines hummed softly, their faces reflecting my pale, wide-eyed expression. And then I saw it in the reflection, or rather, I felt it, a pair of glowing, unblinking eyes staring straight at me from behind. I whipped around, but there was nothing there. The hallway leading to the restrooms was dark and silent, yet I could feel the weight of those eyes, following me, waiting. I tried to convince myself it was nerves, that my mind was playing tricks after the unsettling events of earlier. I took a few steps forward, toward another lane, and noticed something strange. Balls were rolling by themselves down empty lanes, striking pins with a mechanical precision that shouldn't have been possible. The pins fell one by one, but the sound was not what I expected. Instead of the sharp, hollow crash I knew from every other visit, it was muted, softer, almost like a muffled scream. I froze, heart hammering. I wanted to turn and run, but my feet felt glued to the floorboards, as if some invisible force were holding me. I leaned closer to one lane, desperate to understand what I was seeing, and my stomach twisted when I noticed the pins more clearly. They were different. Their surfaces seemed textured, like rough wood, and then I realized what it was: the faint outlines of faces, small and contorted in pain, eyes wide with terror, mouths open in silent screams. I staggered back, almost falling over. I pressed my hands to my mouth to stop myself from crying out, but the air felt heavy and suffocating. My breath came in short, panicked gasps, and I could feel sweat running down my neck despite the chill. Then came the sound. It started faint, almost beneath hearing, the soft shuffle of movement from every lane at once. The balls rolled again, faster this time, striking the pins in rhythmic, deliberate patterns. Each crash echoed like a scream, each pin face frozen in horror. I realized with a growing sense of panic that they were moving in response to me, as if the alley itself were aware of my presence. My hands shook uncontrollably, and I tried to step backward, but the shadows seemed to stretch toward me, curling like fingers around my legs. Something brushed against my ankle. Cold, wet. I froze, my stomach lurching. I looked down, my heart leaping into my throat. There it was, a hand, pale and skeletal, emerging from the cracks between the floorboards, its fingers curling toward me. I wanted to kick it away, to run, to do anything, but my body refused to move. The hand gripped tighter, cold and unyielding, sending a surge of terror up my spine. I could feel its grip, the subtle pressure around my ankle, the sharp nails digging slightly into my skin. My vision blurred with fear, and the whispering sound from before returned, louder now, threading into my mind, pulling at my thoughts with its soft, insidious hiss. I stumbled backward, jerking my leg free, and the hand disappeared beneath the floor as if it had never been there, but I knew it hadn't gone. I could feel it waiting, somewhere beneath me, patient and hungry. I pressed myself against the wall, trying to collect my racing thoughts. The lights flickered again, the sound of rolling balls bouncing in every direction. Each crash of pins echoed off the walls, amplifying the sense that the alley was alive, breathing, aware of me. I realized then that I had no way out. The doors were too far away, blocked by shadows and strange, shifting figures that moved just beyond my vision. The glowing eyes were everywhere now, reflections on every shiny surface, following me, waiting for the moment I faltered. And in that moment, I saw it. A lane at the far end, empty, completely still. And yet, I could feel it staring, a silent presence hidden within the darkness, drawing me closer without moving. I wanted to scream, to run, to throw myself into the unknown and escape, but the alley didn't let me. It was holding me, testing me, teasing me, and I knew that whatever was in this place, it wasn't going to let me leave easily. And then I noticed something that made my stomach drop. The first ball I had picked up when I arrived had rolled out of the rack on its own, stopping directly in front of me. The surface had changed, the number I had seen before replaced with a jagged symbol, one I couldn't read but somehow understood. It pulsed faintly, a dark heartbeat of warning. I took a shaky step back into the floor beneath. The ball rippled, as if the alley itself were breathing, alive, and waiting. I stumbled backward, my heart hammering in my chest, trying to put as much distance as possible between me and the moving pins, the whispering shadows, and that impossible ball. The alley had changed, though I couldn't tell exactly how. The walls seemed to stretch upward, taller than I remembered, and the fluorescent lights flickered sporadically, casting long, jagged shadows that moved independently of their objects. My eyes darted around, trying to find the doors, the exit, anything that would allow me to escape this nightmare, but the space seemed to have grown, elongated, twisted beyond reason. The sound of rolling balls followed me relentlessly, each one striking pins with a deliberate, mechanical rhythm. Their crashes were muffled, distorted, and each one seemed to echo a screamer sound that burrowed into my chest and refused to leave. I tried to focus on the lanes ahead, but the further I looked, the less sense the alley made. Lanes stretched farther than they should have, fading into darkness, and shadows curled along the edges like crawling fingers. I pressed myself against the wall near the spare ball racks, trying to steady my shaking hands. I needed to think, needed to plan, needed to find a way out. But then I saw it, or rather felt it before I could see it clearly. Movement at the far end of one lane. Slow, deliberate. Not a ball, not a person. A figure, shrouded in darkness, stepping forward in uneven, jerky motions. Its presence pressed on me, heavy and suffocating, a weight that made it impossible to breathe properly. I wanted to run, but my legs refused, rooted to the floorboards as if the alley itself were holding me hostage. I forced my eyes on the figure. It held something in its hands, long and dark, but the dim flickering light prevented me from seeing it clearly. The shadows around it shifted and stretched, and I could feel its gaze, even though the figure's face remained hidden in darkness. I knew it was aware of me. I knew it was waiting, patient, as if it had been expecting me all along. My gaze dropped involuntarily to the rack of balls beside me. They started to shake subtly, then one rolled out slowly, as though guided by invisible fingers. I froze, heart hammering, as it stopped inches from my foot. That's when I noticed the markings carved into its surface. They weren't numbers this time. Letters, sharp and uneven, etched deep step. My breath caught in my throat, panic surging, and I realized I had nowhere to run. I pressed myself closer to the wall, trying to make myself as small as possible, hoping the figure wouldn't notice me, hoping it would pass. But then it moved again, closer, its steps silent yet heavy. Shadows stretched from its body, writhing like serpents across the floor, reaching for me. The lights flickered one final time, plunging the alley into near-total darkness. I could see only faint outlines, the glow of eyes and the reflections of the polished floors, the elongated shapes of the shadows stretching toward me, the ball at my feet pulsating with a dark energy. I tried to tell myself it was a trick of the lights, that my mind was unraveling, but the cold pressed against my skin, the low hum vibrating in the floorboards, the faint, wet brushing against my ankle. I knew none of this was imagination. My body screamed at me to run, yet my feet were trapped. I wanted to scream, to cry, to do anything, but no sound came. My throat burned with the effort of forcing air through it, my eyes watering as I watched the figure advance. Closer, closer, until I could see it clearly enough to recognize the horror in its face. It wasn't human. Its skin was gray and mottled, stretched tight over hollow bones. Its eyes were deep black voids, unblinking, and its mouth hung open in a grotesque expression, almost stitched shut, as if sewn to prevent sound, yet somehow still grinning. It raised the object in its hands, a bowling pin, but the end of it seemed wrong, twisted, as if alive, wriggling in slow, impossible movements. I knew instinctively that it wasn't a weapon in the normal sense. It was an extension of the alley itself, of the shadows, of the unseen forces that had been waiting for me. My legs moved before I could stop them, bolting down the lanes in blind terror. The floorboards groaned beneath my weight, and the alley seemed to stretch endlessly ahead. I could feel the figure following, slower but relentless, and I realized with a sinking dread that the ball at my feet was rolling again, nudging me forward, forcing me closer to the thing I didn't want to face. I stumbled, nearly falling, and looked down at the floor. The boards were cracked and warped, and pressed into them were tiny faces, contorted in silent screams, eyes wide with terror, mouths open in everlasting silence. I tried to tear my eyes away, tried to focus on the exit, on anything that would make sense, but the alley was alive. It was aware, it was patient, and I was still here. Something touched my shoulder lightly, cold and wet. I spun around, but the figure hadn't moved. My chest tightened. The shadows writhed again. The ball rolled closer, and I realized with horror that it wasn't just a ball. It was a messenger, a warning, and I knew, deep in my bones, that the game was far from over. I ran blindly down the lanes, my legs burning, heart hammering so loudly it echoed in my ears over the low hum and crashing sounds that filled the alley. The floor beneath me groaned, and I stumbled over fallen pins, the smell of wax and popcorn now tinged with something far fouler, a stench that made my stomach churn. I glanced behind me, but the figure wasn't there, or at least, I couldn't see it, but I could feel it. Its presence pressed against me, patient, waiting, just beyond my perception. The shadows stretched along the walls, curling like fingers, reaching, writhing, and I realized that the alley itself had become a living thing, twisting and bending to trap me. I pressed myself against a corner near a row of spare balls, gasping for breath. The balls began to shake and roll slowly, forming a semicircle around me. Each crash of pins sounded more like a scream than a strike, and the pin faces, tiny and contorted in pain, seemed to stare at me with pleading eyes. I swallowed hard, trying to block it out, but my mind kept pulling me toward them, toward the reality I didn't want to face. Every instinct told me to flee, but I had no sense of direction. The alley had changed, stretching endlessly, lanes and shadows overlapping walls, bending in impossible angles. I glanced at the snack counter. The glass shelves were shattered, the remains reflecting the flickering lights in jagged, fractured images. Something moved behind the shards, a massive shape writhing, reaching for me. I backed away, my foot slipping over a ball that rolled unnaturally on its own. I jumped back, but the ball didn't stop. It rolled deliberately, stopping only inches from my heel, tilting slightly as if aware of my gaze. Etched into it were letters, jagged and uneven. "You are next." The message made my blood run cold. I didn't need to read it to understand it. The alley itself had declared its intent. I turned toward the lanes, desperate for any escape. But the shadows were everywhere now, crawling across the floors and walls. I could see faint outlines of figures pressed into the floorboards, faces contorted in horror, arms reaching upward as if begging for release. My chest tightened. I wanted to close my eyes, to run blindly, to escape this place, but I couldn't. The alley had trapped me, and every step I took only seemed to lead me deeper into its darkness. A sudden movement at the far end of the lane froze me in place. The figure had returned, emerging from the shadows, closer now. Its stitched mouth flexed as though smiling, and its black, hollow eyes stared straight through me. In its hands, it carried the twisted pin, wriggling slightly as if alive, pulsating with a dark, unnatural energy. The floorboards beneath it creaked and groaned, stretching unnaturally toward me, and I felt a pressure in my chest, like the weight of the entire alley pressing down. I stumbled forward, forced by some unseen force, and nearly fell onto the warped floor. The shadows stretched further, curling around my legs, trying to hold me in place. The ball I had tried to escape from rolled closer again, nudging me, guiding me toward the figure. The tiny faces pressed into the boards stared up at me, screaming silently, and I realized with a sinking dread that they were not just decorations, they were warnings, markers of those who had come before me and failed. I pressed myself against the wall, trying to collect my thoughts, but the alley refused to let me breathe. The lights flickered violently, throwing every shadow into sharp relief. Figures emerged from the walls, thin, faceless arms reaching outward, as if the alley were gathering an army around me. The figure with the twisted pin took a deliberate step forward, and I could feel the floor beneath me warp slightly, tilting, making it impossible to find solid footing. Then I noticed something worse. The ball at my feet shifted again. Its surface rippled, the number carved into it changing rapidly. 1, 2, 3. I realized with horror that it was counting down, marking the moments until it would claim me. My stomach dropped. My body screamed at me to run, but the floor groaned and cracked. Pin faces staring up from every crevice, tiny mouths opening in silent terror, as if they were warning me that I had no choice. I pressed my back harder against the wall, forcing myself to stay upright, but the shadows were closing in. The figure raised the pin high, twisting it in its hands, and I could see the floorboards ripple beneath it, alive and hungry. The alley itself seemed to breathe around me, exhaling cold, rotten air into my lungs, filling me with panic. I realized then, with a clarity that made my blood run cold, that the alley was not just a place, it was a predator, and I was exactly where it wanted me. I don't remember how long I ran. Time didn't exist anymore. The lanes stretched endlessly, folding over themselves in ways that made no sense. Walls bending, shadows crawling, and the lights flickering with a rhythm that felt alive. Every step I took sent shivers down my spine as the floorboards creaked and groaned beneath me. The air smelled foul, thick with the stench of decay and wax, and the muffled sound of balls rolling, striking pins, echoed from every direction. Each crash sounded like a scream, each echo pulling me deeper into the alley's unnatural geometry. I stumbled and fell onto a lane, face pressed against the cold, polished wood. The pins above me wobbled unnaturally, as if alive, and their faces, those tiny twisted faces, screamed silently, staring directly at me. I pressed my hands over my ears, but I could still hear them. The figure had returned, emerging from the shadows like a predator finally revealing itself. Its black, hollow eyes locked onto mine, and the stitched mouth flexed, smiling in a way that made my stomach turn. The twisted pin in its hands wriggled like a living thing, pulsating with a dark energy that made the alley itself tremble. I scrambled to my feet, backing away as fast as I could, but the alley wouldn't let me go. The shadows moved with me, curling around my legs, rising up from the floors, pressing me forward, herding me like prey. The balls rolled independently, forming patterns and symbols that I couldn't understand, yet somehow instinctively feared. The number on the first ball, the one I had picked up when I arrived, was blinking now. 4, 5, 6, as if counting down towards something I didn't want to know. I pressed myself against the wall, gasping, my eyes darting wildly. Figures emerged from the floorboards and walls, thin, faceless, their arms reaching toward me. I could feel their cold, empty hands brushing against my skin, even though I tried to step back, to resist. The whispers returned, louder, now threading into my mind, speaking words I couldn't understand but felt in my bones. Warning, threat, hunger, desperate. I ran toward a lane that seemed familiar. The far end glowed faintly, a dim, cold light, and I thought, maybe, just maybe, it was an exit. I stumbled, nearly falling, and the floorboards beneath me warped like waves, pulling me forward. The shadows were closing in, stretching from the walls and ceilings, crawling over the lanes, twisting around my legs. I felt as if the alley itself had grown teeth, ready to bite me, trap me forever. I reached the lane, my chest heaving, and looked down. The ball from before rolled toward me on its own. Its surface rippled like water, the jagged symbol on it pulsating with light. And then it moved differently, turning, rotating slowly, almost as if it were alive. The twisted, pin-wielding figure stopped at the end of the lane, tilting its head, as though curious, amused, or pleased by my struggle. Its stitched mouth flexed, and I realized with horror that it wasn't just smiling, it was mimicking me. My terror, my helplessness. I forced myself to run past it, toward the faint glow at the end of the lane. The shadows thickened, the figures multiplied, rising from walls, floorboards, even the ceiling. The alley groaned and breathed like some immense, hungry creature. And then, as I reached the glow, the ground beneath me disappeared. I fell into darkness, landing on a cold, hard surface. My body hit the floor hard, but I scrambled to my feet, desperate to escape. I looked around. The alley, the familiar lanes, the glowing pins, the endless shadows was above me now, suspended like a grotesque, floating mirage. And then I saw it. The ball, rolling toward me slowly, deliberately. Its surface rippled again, and inside, faces twisted and screamed, faces I recognized. One of them was mine. My own terrified expression stared back at me from within the rolling orb. The alley groaned above, alive, hungry, watching. I realized then with crushing clarity, the game wasn't over. It would never be over. I tried to move, but the floor beneath me shifted slightly, forcing me forward toward the ball. The twisted, pin-wielding figure appeared on the ceiling, inverted, its eyes black voids staring directly at me. The shadows from above stretched downward, fingers curling, grasping, closing around me. The whispers returned, louder, louder, threading into my mind, the words clear now, though they weren't spoken aloud. Join us. I backed away, but there was nowhere to go. The alley above and around me seemed infinite, alive, patient, its presence pressing into my mind, into my chest. The ball stopped just inches from my foot, rippling, faces pressing outward from within, screaming silently. I realized that whatever this place was, it didn't just trap people. It transformed them, consumed them, made them part of the game. I froze. My reflection, my terrified face, stared back at me from the ball. The shadows stretched closer. The whispers surrounded me completely. The alley pulsed, alive, waiting. And in that moment, I understood with absolute certainty that I was not going to leave. The game would continue. I was already part of it. The ball rolled, and it was coming for me.